because the father or the mother are working somewhere abroad. That is also international relations, right? So we've learned all of this yesterday. Let's move on to thinking a little bit about why wars and peace, right? They are the two dominant concepts that we grapple with in international relations as a discipline, right? So when we think about wars, remember that the discipline the idea is that we have to, in between the two world wars, the idea is to end wars, right? We have too many wars and we have to end this war, so we have to think of a discipline from which we can study the causes of war and prevent it and bring peace to the world, right? That was the idea. So in some sense, you can say that war is the foundational sort of topic within international relations. Everybody wants to study war, its causes, how to end wars, what do wars do, the impact of wars. It's really, really powerful. So it's kind of the foundational subject of IR as a discipline. But for us, the question always is, as students of IR, as people interested in the world around us, which all of us are, the question is, why do people fight wars, right? Is it something that human nature is prone to? Is it something that we all feel that there's an urge to fight wars, right? Is it a kind of a biological need? Remember, we learned always that, for example, it's very gendered, but we learned that men go to wars and women are more peaceful. This is also something that is told to us. How true are these, right? And is it something that is part of nature, part of our personalities that we can't do without wars? What do you think about that? Why do people or nations go to war? Like, nations are also people, right? Decisions are made by people. जब हम कहते हैं कि कोई देश, Russia is at war with Ukraine, but Russia, the decisions are made by President Putin, right? There's a person involved, right? Netanyahu in Israel, right? He's the prime minister who's making those decisions. Hamas, there's a leader making those decisions. So it's about people, right? So tell me, do you think that people go to wars because they feel the urge for it? Why do you think people fight? What do you think? Bolo, Rishikesh.
I think so. People go to war because for expanding their territory, or sometimes there are some personal causes for conflict between the countries.
Like, for example?
Like insufficient supply of resources, can we say?
Yes, of course we can
Yes.
say that. But thank you. That's a great answer.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Ma'am, I think so. War for like people do conflicts for their prestige, or they do war, for example, for spread for knowing the countries that I am armed and like deals like if a country is there which provides the, military weapons to another countries. So if it do wars, so it can show that I have powerful weapons and that all. Yes, ma'am, and prestige also of there that maintain the prestige of a country. Ma'am Jay Agrawal.
Ma'am, there are many ways that countries fulfill their interest by aggression or to project their power. So, ma'am, I think war is also one of the way that country used to project their power to another country by fighting with another country. Nihal Rai. Mm, okay.
Ma'am, when there is exploitation of human rights in the country, uh, like Hindu was beaten in Canada, and that Canadian. Yes. Yes. Bhavya.
Ma'am, for me there is two answers. In today's world, uh, war is more like a strategy. Either I want to suppress people outside my country, otherwise this is a state terrorism. In deeper sense, war is not like a necessity, but it's between us, it's an emotion. In a movie, I think Equilibrium, it has been shown that after World War III or IV, they have found that emotion is the root of war. So basically the rage in us is war in broader sense, in broader vision. So basically we are the war, we are the warmongering people, but not right now, it's based on the situation.
Ma'am, like for example, the people of India only, in India we have different kinds of religions, different kind of communities, different kind of castes, and in them we have many problems like women's inferiorities and caste inferiorities. So in my opinion, that is also a kind of war which is not fought by everyone, just then globalized, but also it is in a part of country, it is a part of international relation, which not here but there, it gives an effect, deep effect on the people of a country, and somewhat kind of a glimpse of that can relate to a very big problems in. Yes, ma'am. Pratna Gupta.
Because you're recording it, right? Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Ma'am,
Okay.
in my opinion, I think both external and internal factors are responsible. Like external factor like feminine and financial stability is not there in the country. So I think people go for wars as there is need for the country. So I think it's both the external and internal factors.
Okay, that makes very good sense to me. Tell me your name. I will not.
Deshna.
Dishna.
Yes,
Okay.
Deshna.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, yeah, so we see from all the responses that you give us here that there are multiple reasons, but some of it is common, right? The idea of what constitutes power, right? What is status? What is national interest or somebody's personal interest to wage a war, right? So there are all these kinds of things that coalesce. There's a pattern that you see which makes people go to war. So what we are also seeing is that it is not something that is natural to a human being. These are conditions that are created, right? They're conditions created, so it's created by certain kinds of emotional responses, certain kinds of leaders, certain kinds of politics, and then we go to war, right? So it's a created condition. How do we address this in terms of ending wars, right? So when you think about war as well, it's not a new phenomenon. And if you're really interested in wars and its history, I mean, there is a Greek text, and you can find a abridged version of it. Obviously, I don't expect you to read it in details, but there might be an abridged version, which is the history of the Peloponnesian War. It is one of the first texts that we consider on war, why wars are fought, who fights them, what are the different groups that fight, right? Mahabharata, of course, you know, and it is a very important text, not just about war, but as I told you, it is a very important work of peace. It tells us where peace has failed, right? And that is Clausewitz. Clausewitz was a scholar who writes about war, and it is also one of the first texts that we teach students in international relations, and there's a lot of detailing of war as a strategy, how wars are fought, right? So, and what Clausewitz argues is war is basically a kind of politics, but it is not the usual kind of politics. It is politics by other means, and that other means is coercion, it is killing, it is injury, right? All of this that happens in war. So it is similar to doing other kinds of politics. So now that we know so much about war, why is peace so difficult to achieve, right? We've understood that war happens because of all these reasons. But peace is such an important concept, and yet it is missing from our vocabulary, from how we talk about the world, right? Peace is missing. We always find ourselves in the midst of wars, and we find peace processes going on in different parts of the world, yeah? But why don't we talk so much about peace? Sometimes we say it is too utopian. Does everybody understand what a utopia is? What is a utopia? No? Yes. There's one hand at the back.
This is a city of God, because there is everything is good, everything is right.
Yeah, something that is, at that level where everything seems to be perfect, it is aspirational. Everybody wants to get there. That is utopia. So peace is a utopia, right? You may not get there, but that's what we all want, right? So now the question is it a utopia? Is peace possible, right? So first of all, it's very difficult to define, right? What is peace? Again, if I took a round of answers from you all, you'll have different answers. Now, very quickly, can you tell me what peace is? Wait, 1 second, yeah? Let me see some other responses. Yes, there's a hand there. Yes, please.
Ma'am, peace.
Can you speak in the microphone a little bit? Yeah, so I can hear you. Yeah.
Ma'am,
Yes.
peace me.
क्या हुआ? सोच रहे थे कुछ? Peace. What is peace? Acha, tell me your name first.
Poon Gupta.
I can't hear you. Microphone. mein?
Poon Gupta.
Okay. Now tell me, do you think that we should be peaceful?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Why?
Ma'am, because if we will not be peaceful, so
Yeah.
many wars will happen.
So many wars will happen. Yeah. So wars, what do? They kill people, right?
Yes, ma'am.
People get injured. People
ma'am.
get hurt.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
war is not a good thing, right? So we want peace so that we can all live in harmony,
Yes, ma'am.
right?
And peace is important for development also.
Oh, that's such a good point. Did everybody hear that? Peace is important for development. And what is development? Can you tell us that?
Ma'am, to
Hmm.
ma'am, to improve such things that are on little bad conditions.
Perfect. That's a brilliant answer. So peace is to do with development. We were trying to link that today, and that's what you've told us. Again, how do you spell your name? Like, can I just see your Purna? Purna hi without the U. Okay, Purna. Purna, right? Purn, right? Purn. So isn't that the perfect answer? That peace is to do with development, and development is to do with the fact that we want to cover up for the deficits, right? There's a lot of deficits in the world, right? There are problems that we want to fix, right? What is not there, what is bad, we want to fix that, right, Poorn? I got that right? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Anybody else at the back? Up.
Ma'am, better understanding between countries.
How do we create that?
Ma'am, that we have to means we have to make partnership with other countries also.
To make good partnerships with countries,
Yes,
better understanding,
Yes, ma'am.
so that they don't go to war, right?
Yes,
If
ma'am.
there is situation, it can be addressed. Okay, that's a good answer. Your name?
Harshit.
Harshit. Okay, great. And now, yes.
Non-violence and brotherhood among country.
Such a sweet answer. Look, nobody mentioned that so far. Non-violence, right? And we will talk a little bit about. It's a very good answer. Thank you for that. Thank you. Tell me your name. Rudransh. Rudransh, that's such a good answer. After all, non-violence originated in this country as an idea, as a big idea. Remember Gandhiji and all the talk about non-violence? Thank you, Rudransh. More people at the back. I'll let you wait because you've had your turn. और कोई यहाँ पे? हाँ, आप बोलिए. Yes.
Well, coexistence of different ideas without causing any intentional harm to the other.
Right. Without causing intentional harm. And I loved that word that you used, intentional, right? किसी को जानबूझ के तकलीफ नहीं पहुंचाना is the way to peace, because you may unintentionally we all hurt people, right? But जानबूझ के नहीं करना, right? That is important. Tell me your name.
Mantavya.
Mantavya. Okay, thank you so much. I think we have collected a few answers. I wish we were sitting in a way that I could move around and also meet you all at the back. I end up being there because of the PowerPoint. Oh my God, my own horror picture there. Okay. So what is peace then? First of all, very difficult to define because we have all these different answers that we got from you all. It means many different things. Some people will say it is about education for me. Some will say it is about jobs for me. Some will say that I don't want to experience violence. I don't want war. So there are multiple ways in which we can do peace, right? Peace is it only the absence of war? It's not the only absence of war, right? There has to be much more. In any country we talked about, right? There can be a situation where there is no war, but there are other kinds of problems that we face, right? Which is whether it is violence against women, violence against minorities, whatever. I mean, there's so many other issues, unemployment, gang wars, criminality. So that doesn't mean that the country is peaceful. And I did give you the example of Australia, but that is a problem in other countries as well, not just Australia. There are lots of problems in the US, for example. Inter-race relations in the US. Remember a couple of years ago, the big movement called Black Lives Matter. Did you hear of that? Yeah, and it was a big movement to argue that African Americans or black people everywhere in the world are not being treated equally, right? You remember? It was a big movement. And race riots were very, very common at one point of time in America, in Europe, right? So we think about people as being equal. So absence of war is not enough. Attainment of social goals, right? What kind of social goals? We are thinking of justice for all. We are thinking of education. We're thinking of non-discrimination. Employment is so important, right? We are producing so many educated people in our country, for example. Does everybody get employed? If you're not employed, if you're not earning, can you be at peace? No, right? So think about why the definition of peace expanding to all of these areas, right? And more importantly, not just the absence of war at the external level, at the internal level, but absence of any kind of violence, right? Discrimination is violence. How we treat other people who are, who don't get access to the same privileges that we do is also violence, right? So how do we end that? So if you think about peace around these three parameters, absence of war, thinking about social goals, attainment of social goals, and absence of any kind of violence, we can come at some kind of conclusion of what peace is, right? But the important question for us is peace attainable? How do we achieve this? We've all defined it. This is what we want. But ye kaise sambhav hai? How do we bring that in our daily lives and in the different wars that we experience? How do we make that possible, right? Let's learn.
Yes.
How do we deal with these kinds of terms, and how are they used within international relations, right? So we use conflict prevention, conflict management, conflict resolution, conflict transformation, पोस्ट कॉन्फ्लिक्ट रिकंस्ट्रक्शन. ये कितने बड़े बड़े शब्द हैं, लेकिन इनकी मीनिंग आप देखो कितने डिफरेंट स्टेजेस में हम पीस के बारे में सोच सकते हैं, राइट? सो आई विल गो थ्रू ईच वन ऑफ देम वेरी ब्रीफली बिकॉज आई वांट यू ऑल टू थिंक मोर, जस्ट गेट द सेंस ऑफ द आइडिया. सो conflict prevention is to prevent a conflict from escalating, right? Conflict is possible anywhere, but all conflicts need not lead to violence and war. You and I can be, in a conflict. I can disagree with you. You can say, ye mera hai. I can say, nahi, ye mera hai. Tumne meri cheez le li hai, right? But does that mean that we come to blows, that I hit you, you hit me, and that we kill each other? No, right? So conflict is good also. Conflict can be good if it's productive, and we decide ki nahi, ye shayad tumhara ho sakta hai, mera ho sakta hai. We have this conversation, and then we can resolve it and say ki aisa karte hain, share kar lete hain. हमें नहीं पता ये किसका है या किसी और का हो सकता है, right? We can have that conversation. So it doesn't mean that we come to blows. So conflict prevention is take action before something gets worse. So before, for example, the conflict escalates, can there something be done? And this is a good question to ask. Could the conflict between Hamas and Israel, for example, be avoided? Can some of those conflicts be prevented? If they can be prevented, good. If they can't be prevented, then there are other things that we can do. Conflict management, right? That a conflict has occurred, how do you reduce its impact, right? So yes, Israel and Hamas in this conflict, that has to be managed because the casualties are rising. That is why we are saying, where is the ceasefire, for example, right? What is the point of indiscriminately killing people? How do we think about managing the effects of this conflict? How do we think of refugees, for example, or people who are displaced because of war, right? How do we manage that conflict? Then, of course, there is conflict resolution, right? Conflict resolution as in, can we think of solutions to the conflict, different conflict? Can we think about ways in which we can resolve it? We can find that the two parties can come together. Can Hamas and Israel, for example, come together in the current circumstances? Do you think that's possible? Possibly not. Possibly not. So it has escalated beyond that. But in many conflicts, two parties, they can come and sit together and resolve it. And it depends on the particular context, right? Conflict transformation, where causes of conflict can be overcome. If there is a conflictual situation which has arisen because of certain factors, we can transform it to something different, right? We can look at it differently and we can transform it. Transform is a good word. It is about bringing about the change in the perspective that you realize. Maybe you and I will realize that we are fighting over the book and maybe it's not worth it, right? Why should we kill each other over the book, right? So the ways in which we think about it. And post-conflict reconstruction is something that happens a lot in international relations, where what happens is the UN gets involved, and the idea is that those who have picked up arms and weapons, they can be brought back to the table. The war is over. How do we accommodate them in society, back into society, right? If you and I fight a war, for example, right, we become part of a guerrilla group and we fight. But now it is that our group has decided that we want peace and we don't want war. So when we come back to society, how should we be treated, right? Should we be treated as criminals? Is there a way we can be socially rehabilitated? These are big questions. Because sometimes it's not just a handful of people who wage wars, it's the entire community of people who have been involved in wars, right? So how do we deal with them, right? There are a number of processes. People have to be disarmed, all the arms have to be given up, they have to be reintegrated into society, they all need jobs, they all need a house, they all need social security. How do we deal with those kinds of questions, right? So in this context, then the other point that we need to think about is how to build peace, right? How to work towards building peace. So we said that we don't have a solution to the big questions. We may not have a solution to all the big questions. Peace may seem like a utopia, लेकिन कोशिश तो करनी पड़ेगी ना. आपने सुना ही है कि कोशिश करने वालों की हार नहीं होती. कोशिश हमेशा करनी होती है किसी भी चीज़ में. You have to try, and once you try, you realize that you've at least have the satisfaction that you didn't give up. Victory is never that satisfying, but when you feel that, oh my goodness, I tried so much, if you win something, if you lose something, that's part of the deal. एग्ज़ाम में बहुत बार होता है कि नंबर नहीं आते, लेकिन पढ़ाई की थी, हमेशा ये पूछो. And this makes you feel really good because you realize that I possibly didn't work hard enough. That is your answer. But if you feel you gave it everything, then you know that probably you need to change some kind of strategy, but you don't feel disappointed. Very often we are disappointed because we know we didn't work hard, right? We know that. और ये आपको कोई टीचर नहीं बताना है, कोई किसी और से नहीं सुनना है आपको, अपने पेरेंट्स से or from your teachers. That's not what you want to hear, or from your friends. Ask yourself that question. And that is the integrity we all need, that we are the best judge for ourselves. That's why I said yesterday, you can be standing at the stage, and if you feel really kind of afraid of public speaking, tell yourselves that nobody has the power and authority and the moral right to judge you. It's very difficult to stand there and talk. But the very fact that you're going there with that confidence and doing it, it's amazing. Yesterday night, I was there briefly to watch your performances after dinner. And it was amazing that you could all go on stage. I don't think that you had prepared, your teachers were involved in all this, right? I assume you all did it on your own. It was just amazing for me how much effort you had put in and how you coordinated it. There was no messiness. लग रहा था जैसे पता नहीं कई दिनों से आप लोगों ने प्रैक्टिस करके एक के बाद एक स्टेज में आके ऐसे परफॉर्म कर रहे हो, राइट? जबकि आई एम श्योर कि उतना समय नहीं दिया था क्या? नहीं, जल्दी किया था ना, ये कोऑर्डिनेट किया था कि करना है ये, राइट? बट इट वॉज रियली अमेजिंग. तो ये आपको कोई जज नहीं कर सकता कि आप अच्छा कर रहे हैं. आप वहाँ गए, उस स्टेज पे परफॉर्म किया, वो बड़ी बात है. टेक दैट कॉन्फिडेंस विद यू, राइट? आई एम सेइंग ऑल दिस बिकॉज koshish is such a big word, and it never fails you. Sometimes you feel like, oh man, I tried so much, but it didn't work out. Well, trying is feeling really powerful when you keep trying, right? So what do we do with peace? We keep trying to understand why a conflict occurs. Ab conflict jab hum sochte hain, don't think about the big picture, the big conflicts in the world, right? Think about everyday life. We talked yesterday and we said कि हम आपस में ही झगड़ते हैं इतना, है ना? बहुत झगड़ते हैं. हम उसको भी तो इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस ही बताया हमने कि एवरीडे लाइफ इज़ इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस. कहाँ से हमारी किताब आ रही है, हम क्या पढ़ रहे हैं, क्या हिस्ट्री पढ़ रहे हैं, क्या जोग्राफी पढ़ रहे हैं. Tomorrow we are in the market, in a mall, we meet different kinds of friends. Everything constitutes our conversations, can be about where we are going to study further, which college choices we'll make, whether we'll go abroad or not, who's going where for employment. I mean, all of these questions, right? But think about conflict at a daily level. How hard do we work to resolve it? I'm not exactly great at this myself, because conflict हमेशा होता है. गुस्सा आता है ना, बहुत जल्दी आता है. And when I was younger, of course, I used to get a lot angrier. But उस anger पे हमारा गुस्सा हमारा control नहीं होता है, and we make enemies of people. और ये भी होता है ना कि जब हम अपने लोग जो होते हैं, हमारे friends, parents, teachers, siblings, उन पे ज़्यादा गुस्सा आता है. उनको ज़्यादा कड़वा बोल लेते हैं हम लोग, है ना? We talk so badly to our friends, but if it's a stranger And if we happen to do something, what do? We're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You know, I mean, we talk so politely to strangers. Can some of you relate to this at least? But we are not so kind to our own people. To our own mothers, fathers, we're like, oh yeah, okay, whatever, I don't have to listen to you, okay, whatever. Teacher कुछ बोल रही है, no, I don't have to. But कोई बाहर का है, कोई जिसके हम इज्जत करते हों या जिसको जानते भी ना हो, हम कैसे बात करते हैं उनसे, है ना? मैं करती हूँ at least. I used to do that. I used to dismiss my mother. She used to be standing there wanting to ask a question, and I'd be like, Mama, please, I have something else to do. You know, I was not very kind to my own mother very often. Father, I used to be scared of, but you know, that was a different dynamic. So just think about how we deal with classroom में आपके conflicts होते हैं ना? होते हैं कि नहीं होते हैं? कोई झगड़ते नहीं हो? Yes, no? बहुत झगड़ते हो मतलब. अच्छा कैसे resolve करते हो बताओ? किसी से झगड़ा होता है तो फिर what do you go and do? Do you continue the fight for a while? मनाते हो फ्रेंड्स को? कैसे मनाते हो? जाके सॉरी बोलते हो गलती करते हो तो? कितने लोग सॉरी बोलते हो विश्वास करते हो? How many of you apologize after a mistake? Okay, many of you do. Many of you do. And there's no, okay. How many of you feel that you struggle with saying sorry? You struggle with saying sorry. Come on, be honest. कुछ लोगों को मुश्किल होती है सॉरी बोलने में. आपने हाथ उठाया, very good. सॉरी बोलने में मुश्किल होती है? बिल्कुल. क्यों होती है? Let's share that. See, now we have so many people. मुझे भी होती है. It's not easy to say sorry because you have to acknowledge that something might be wrong with you or that you didn't intend it, but किसी ने ऐसा समझ लिया तो मैं क्यों sorry बोलूं, right? अच्छा बोलो वहाँ पे आप बोलिए. Why do you feel? Do you feel the same? Yeah.
It actually depends upon the people as well.
Yes.
I am familiar with the other person, so I don't have this concept like.
Let's listen, please. Huh.
Something like that, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It depends on the it's not easy because it's formulated by familiarity with the person, the context, what the fight is about, right? So I agree. Anybody else? Thank you. And your name again, please?
Nishma.
Nishma. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else who struggles with apologizing or feeling that, you know, you don't always have to say sorry? It's not easy. Struggle. क्यों struggle करते हो?
Because for saying sorry, we have to realize that something means we are wrong in this case.
Yeah, and you think it's not easy, right? Because we have to accept that we are wrong, right? It doesn't come easy. Thank you so much.
I realized that time when means if it is my fault, I say sorry. But if it's not my fault totally, then I little that problem to say the sorry. That's all.
Yeah, so it's this realization whether we are at fault or not, right? It doesn't come very easily to us. And all of us have a little bit of sense of self, jisko hum ego kehte hain, right? So we have, imagine at a smaller scale in the classroom, we have such egos. Imagine the leaders who are making the decisions to go to war. Think about Netanyahu, Putin, or the leader of Hamas, or think about those who run governments and countries. Do they say sorry? Is it easy for them to kind of backtrack and say that I may have done something wrong? Could Hamas have said, okay, we shouldn't have done this action? Or could, the Prime Minister of Israel say, okay, we've killed enough people, now let's just, it's not easy at that level, right? The fact that we can be forgiving, we can accept that we've made mistakes, doesn't happen at that level. So therefore, we have to think about conflict resolution starting from our own lives and think about how when we occupy higher offices, positions, kal ko aap log bhi jaoge na, many of you will be in important government jobs, you will do so many different things. And at that point of time, this is what international relations will teach you. If you do any course there, or if later on you take a degree in international relations, it'll teach you, and perhaps I hope that you will reflect upon it and say that maybe this isn't important. Maybe I can resolve this conflict in a different way, right? It is a skill to be acquired, right? Sometimes we don't, if you unpack it, it's easier to understand conflict. Otherwise, it seems to be so big. But if you start unpacking it and seeing, you'll be like, okay, this is not such a big deal. So peace building, therefore, is something that we all engage in at our individual level, But we also engage in it at a larger level where the UN gets involved, the European Union gets involved, there are a number of NGOs that get involved, right? And they come together, they bring the different sides together, and they try to resolve the conflict, right? So it's important to think about peace from a larger perspective. Peace is very, very difficult, and peace is only possible when we realize that wars are fought. We cannot sort of wipe away the history of war. We cannot say that wars don't happen. Peace happens when we recognize that war is a possibility, war happens, war में injuries होती है, war में इतना problem होता है, इसलिए हमें peace चाहिए. I'm remembering there's a great Indian poet who also wrote Bollywood songs. I mean, most of you, of course, wouldn't remember, but Sahir Ludhianvi, किसी ने नाम सुना है Sahir Ludhianvi का? लिखते थे, गाने लिखे हैं उन्होंने कई. किसी ने भी नहीं सुना साहिर लुधियानवी का नाम? आपने सुना है? हाँ, साहिर का कोई गाना आपको याद है? पर एक वो याद है, कौन सा गाना? गाने याद नहीं, पर उनका नाम सुना है. बहुत बड़े शायर, बहुत बड़े लेखक और उर्दू के बहुत अच्छे शायर थे. बॉलीवुड के कई गाने लिखे हैं उन्होंने. बट वन ऑफ द सॉन्ग्स दैट वन वेरी गुड थिंग दैट ही राइट्स इज अबाउट वॉर, कि जंग तो खुद एक मसला है, वो क्या किसी मसले का हल ढूंढेगा. आई मीन वॉर इज समथिंग दैट इज अ प्रॉब्लम itself, and we think of war as a solution to a problem, right? It's a very famous poem by him, right? So I'm just trying to tell you that war doesn't resolve anything. The awareness of war, what it does, the destruction it causes, makes us desire peace, right? But peace is often the utopia, because you could argue endlessly what is peace. But there is something called peace, because we realize that it's not fully attainable. Nobody can be in that meditative state and think that I am totally at peace. That may not happen, but minimum damage to human lives, right? And maximizing aspirations of human life is peace. Minimum damage. Because wo to hoga hi, but how can we minimize the impact of the circumstances, the violence around us on human beings, and how can we fulfill our aspirations within that, right? So we think about that very differently. How much time do we have? What time is it? 11:30? What? 11:10 hua. Okay. So we still have a bit of a time. We are going good, right? Now I'm going to tell you some stories from my own fieldwork, because I want you to get a sense of how international relations as a discipline, if you study that in the future, if you're interested in it from your readings of literature, media, books, jo bhi padhoge, social media mein, how do you kind of make sense of the world? And I'm going to tell you these stories so you feel that if I could do it, maybe some of you will take it up later and feel inspired to do this kind of research or writing or engage with it, right? So this is something that happened in 1991. Can anybody tell me who the gentleman on the right is, the picture? Rajiv Gandhi, former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. 91, he was assassinated, right? Most of you, again, may have read in history or may know, right? He was our Prime Minister. He was the son of Indira Gandhi, also our former Prime Minister, who was killed. And he was killed in a suicide bomb attack, right? 91. And the bomber was from the LTTE, which is the Tamil Tiger Group from Sri Lanka. Those days, there was a war going on. From 1975 to 2009, there was a war in Sri Lanka, a civil war between the Sinhalese, which is the Buddhist community, the state basically, the Sinhalese state, and the minority Tamil community in Sri Lanka, who was fighting for a separate state. And they were led by the LTTE, which was the Tamil, it was called the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. Eelam is homeland, right? And so they wanted a separate state for the Tamils. Now, that war spilled over to India because India sent peacekeeping forces. So that's also interesting. We talk about how states are involved in resolving conflict. When Rajiv Gandhi was in power in 1987-89, they sent peacekeeping forces to Sri Lanka. The idea being that, we will broker, we will be the middle people who will try to resolve this conflict between these two sides, right? So the LTT was very angry with him. That's all you need to know. Eventually, he was killed by the suicide bomber. Do you see the woman who's holding the garland? So she had a bomb attached to her body, and she went and she tried to touch his feet, and she pressed the bomb, and there he went, right? It happened in near Madras. There is a place called Sri Perumbudur, and there he was assassinated. He was, blown up, and a number of other people died as well. It was a horrific incident. I was in school then, and I was actually in class 6, I think, or 6 or 7, I don't remember. But this had such a profound impact on me. Because one of the questions that I asked myself is, why would a woman do it, right? Why would a woman come to this country and kill the former prime minister? Why? And then we are also taught this, right? That women are so peaceful, women don't do these horrific, violent things. Why would she do it? And a lot of people said, oh, she had been brainwashed by the LTTE. They had all these people that they would send for different suicide missions. But I was very intrigued by that, and I said, no, it can't be that, all women who fight wars are all brainwashed. There has to be a story here, right? There has to be why women do it, right? Girls do it. And so I went and investigated this during my PhD. Many years later, in 2008, I went to Sri Lanka, and I met some of these women who were fighting as part of the LTT. LTT used to have a female regiment, and they were fighting the war, but they also had an elite group of fighters who were known as Black Tigers, and a lot of women were part of that. The Black Tigers were training to actually become suicide bombers. And those days, remember, in 1990, suicide bombing was not common. Maybe you hear of it now very often, but those days you didn't hear. I mean, it was such a shock that a human being can become a bomb. In fact, we wouldn't call it suicide bombing, we would call it human bomb, right? And it was such a moment. And so when I went to Sri Lanka, I met these women who had just in 2008, the war was kind of getting over. The government had occupied and defeated the LTTE in many parts, and they were taking control. In 2009, their leader was also killed. And so I went and I kind of took over. Good morning. I actually went there and met these women and interviewed them and asked them, why were you fighting these, why were you part of this war? What did your family say? What was your life like during the war? I mean, these were questions, very tough questions. And in the middle of the war, 2008, the war was still going on. So I traveled to Colombo from England. I was living in England then, went to Colombo, then went to all these areas. एक गाड़ी थी हमारे पास, 2 जर्नलिस्ट थे, एक सिनला जर्नलिस्ट और एक सिनला बोलने वाला और एक तमिल बोलने वाला, और हम उसके साथ पूरे वहाँ पे श्रीलंका में घूमते रहे, जहाँ जहाँ सेफ था, जहाँ इंटरव्यू कर पाए. It was quite risky also. Sometimes we had to be escorted by a lot of gunmen who used to take us to different parts. And anyway, somehow we did interviews. So we interviewed I think around 25 women that we found in the east of Sri Lanka, which had then been liberated by the government. We managed to interview them. I managed to interview them, and then it became part of my PhD thesis, because I wanted to compare the lives of those women to the lives of also women in Kashmir, because Kashmir has also been a state of heightened militancy, as you know, right? We often hear कि कश्मीर में बहुत terrorism होता है. क्यों होता है? और terrorism जब होता है, we often think that, oh, men are terrorists, right? Men do this, men do that. What about women? What are the women doing in Kashmir? And that was my question. So I also went to Kashmir. Unfortunately, I don't have the photos here. I would have loved to show you. Where again I interviewed women, and very interesting insights. In Sri Lanka, the women said that their lives were so awful outside the war that they preferred to be part of the war and do something for their community. But there were also interesting stories which I can never forget. I mean, one belief that we all have is that boys should fight, girls shouldn't fight, right? ये बहुत common है. And this is very problematic, but this is the gendered view that we often get. Oh, it's men who make wars, women who don't make wars, right? women are more peaceful. Now we know that this is not true. There's a lot of research that disproves this, right? Now what is interesting is LTTE used to have a conscription where every family had to give one member to fight for Tamil nationalism. Their idea was that ek koi aana chahiye war mein, right? And it was every family had to make that sacrifice. And most of the times, the family had to choose among their siblings, right? Among their children. Who do you think they used to send to fight? Take a guess. किसको भेजते थे लड़ने? Girls को भेजते थे, correct? Thank you, and thank you all for to people who said yes. They would always choose their girls and send them off to fight. Why do you think they did that? Why do you think they did that? Yes, please. Because they didn't have, no, they used to have men. They used to have men.
But they are old and...
No. They had men, they had, boys of the same age, but they still chose to send girls to fight. Sometimes, not always. I'm not generalizing, but this would happened in a lot of cases. Think about it, and tell me your name. Anvi, right. Anvi, think about it. It's a very good point. But you're right. Where there were no men, of course, tab to koi option nahi hai, and they did send. Or the men were incapable or old. And you're right in that sense. But if there was, then why would they send? Batao.
Because, they don't want to take the responsibility of that girl or something like that.
Yes, you're getting close. Tell me your name.
My name is Mahi.
Mahi, okay. Lovely. Mahi, you're very close to the answer, and it's true that they didn't want to take responsibility of the girls, but what does that tell you? It tells you something more. Something more. And I want to see somebody who hasn't answered, right? I will let you, yes, why don't you answer and then I'll come to you. Both answer
discrimination between men's and women's.
There should be?
No discrimination between men's and women's.
Yes, there shouldn't be, but they would still send the girls. Why? Because, you are saying that because they believed that there should be no discrimination.
Yes, ma'am, men's and women's should also.
Okay, but no, that is not exactly the answer. Tell me your name.
Mudit Solanki.
Mudit, we will come to that. It's a very good point you make. There shouldn't be, but that's not what they believed in, right? They were still sending the girls. Why? We'll come to that, Mudit. Sit here. Aap batao. Yahan de dijiye inko.
Ma'am, because it is the most common belief that only the sons are the heirs of the properties of the parents, and they'll only take the family and their traditions and their generations forward.
And your name again?
Prarthana.
Prarthana, you've got the answer right, because the idea was that because sons are precious, there is gender discrimination. Mudit jo bata rahe the, that is exactly what it is, that they discriminated and they found that send the girls to fight because you have to, and protect the boys because they are precious. They are the ones who will carry forward the family name, the legacy. They will look after us in old age. Girls, they are dispensable. And it was a very tragic story because on the one hand, you also find the logic that, girls shouldn't be fighting, boys should be fighting. But still they would send the girls to fight, right? Isn't that interesting and a contradiction? And it's a sad contradiction because the idea was that, it's okay for girls to get killed, and a lot of them did. Sometimes when the militant group would forcibly take these girls and boys to fight, very often they would come and they would, without telling the parents, they would take these kids away and train them in gunfighting and whatever else. They would take them to the camp and train them as fighters. And so the parents would go running to the camp and they would plead with the leaders that, please let us bring back our children and we want them back. And some of the girls that I interviewed, I told you, they would say, girls like these, they would say, nobody came for them. None of their family members, the father, the mother, they would not go and plead for the girls, but they would go and plead for the boys, right? So it tells you something about how much discrimination there exists in different societies. It's not just in India, not just in Sri Lanka, across the world. And very often we think that In countries like the US, for example, or in Australia or in England, maybe things are better. They're not, because many of these Western countries still don't allow women into combat. There are other kinds of discrimination that occurs, right? So in fact, you find that in these countries, at least women have been fighting. In America, in Australia, women have not been integrated into traditional combat and fighter roles. I'm not saying that fighting is a great thing here, but there is discrimination that occurs at a different level, where you say that girls cannot go into the army, they should not be fighting, right? That's a separate argument. So just to give you a sense that many of them were fighting this war for different reasons, and after the war, things became even more difficult, because I interviewed these women at a time when the war was almost ending, and they were, many of them had been captured and they had been freed. The society was going through this transition. Just after a few months of my visit, the war was over, the leader had been killed, and the government took control of all the areas. And I wondered what happened to some of these women. And it was such a tragic story, because their own society, so on the one hand, the families said, go and fight. But when that also emerged, right? Which we would never know. We would never know why these things happen, right? So this is from one of my field trips that I did. There is no picture of, this is a very old picture. This is with Colonel Karuna, who those days used to be one of the leaders who had rebelled against Prabhakaran, who was the main leader of the Tigers, who died in 2009. And I interviewed him as well, asking him what the women did and why they fought. And he had some very interesting stories to say about how most of the bodyguards of these powerful men within the Tamil Tigers were women. So if the men wanted to be protected, if they wanted like security around them, they always had women bodyguards. So interesting it is, all of these stories. But at the same time, these women who had picked up arms and who were fighting, when the war ended, the men who fought, they became part of the security forces, right? They became part of the conventional army. Army में उनको absorb कर लिया गया कि ठीक है आप लड़ते थे, आपने gun उठाया, आप army में आ जाइए. What do you think they did to the women who were bodyguards? In sabki bodyguards, these women that I interviewed, or otherwise as well, what do you think they did with the women? They told them, okay, now be women, come back, do some sewing, do some cleaning, do some cooking. And they'd not done that, because like men, they had fought in the war. And suddenly the men are all part of the security. But women are told that your place is back in the home. You have to make basket. You have to do very traditional things that girls do. And it was so interesting. It was not easy, that transition for these women. And so many research, papers were written where it was argued that the women were really, really powerful and even more dangerous than the men. The way they used to fight, I mean, I remember interviewing one very famous, doctor, psychiatrist in Jaffna Hospital, who said, when women, they come with injuries, girls and women, when they come with war injuries, they don't cry, they don't shout, they don't scream. It's the men who scream, with pain. So it was really interesting, these kinds of narratives which rupture, which challenge our everyday ideas about war, right? And peace. And we kind of believe this. So unless it's like the rose petal, unless you start unpacking it, एक-एक करके जब खोलते जाओगे परत दर परत, तो कहानी कुछ और लगेगी कि अरे ऐसा होता है. War ऐसी चीज़ है. अगर ये होता कि war is such a good thing for prestige and power and everything good comes out of it, then okay. But once you unpack it, you realize the futility of it. the suffering that it causes. And once you realize that, then you realize it's not worth it. So as long as we keep believing that war is made by men, all men don't like fighting. All men are not, fighting all the time. Men are not, averse to crying. This idea that men shouldn't cry, men shouldn't be emotional, boys don't cry, remember? Boys don't get emotional. It's all not true. It makes us lesser people, because as human beings, we have the same needs, the same emotions. We create these gender disparities, right? We kind of say that this is what the girl can do or cannot do, this is what the boys can do, cannot do. But this is problematic. This is what society tells us, right? There was a long time when girls were told you cannot join the police, you cannot do this, you cannot join certain professions, all you can do is maybe a little bit of, this and that, cooking and cleaning, but not really take up the higher professions. Today, women are joining Air Force and the Army and doing everything under the sun, right? So we have moved. And boys, the pressure is equally on boys. What do we tell them? Don't cry, don't be a sissy, don't do this, don't do that. Why do we tell them that? Isn't it wonderful that we have sensitive people in the world? Sports persons are a good example. How many of you love watching tennis? Roger Federer used to be my favorite player, right? And Roger Federer, often when they lose matches, do you see him cry? They bawl literally, right? They cry their eyes out because they've worked so hard and they lose the matches. And I'm like, it's acceptable in sports, but otherwise it's not good for boys to cry. It's good for all of us to cry, because we are just humans at the end of the day, isn't it? Everyone feels hurt, everyone feels bad. So society should not be deciding for us that this is good, appropriate behavior for boys and this is good for girls. You have to break those and challenge yourself and believe that what you think is the right thing and is the ethical thing without being judged, without being judgmental about other people also. That's important, right? So girls and boys का ये जो भेदभाव है ना, ये war में भी होता है और peace में भी होता है. Peace में कैसे होता है? Peace processes होते हैं. So men are sitting at the table and deciding things. There are never any women, and they make laws about women. They decide about women. When the LTTE was kind of engaged in conversations with the Sri Lankan state, Norwegians were the mediators of peace. There were no women in those conversations, whereas so many of the women were fighting in this war. But what about their issues? So think about what peace processes look like when we think about war and peace, and to dismantle those narratives. Now, I just want to quickly also tell you some of the things that I've done. So Kashmir also, I had the same finding where women told me that men fight, yes, they become militants and they hold the gun and they do all of these things. What do? We clean, we cook, but we are the ones who carry guns. We are the ones who look after families when the men go away and the children are left to us. We are the ones who fend for society, look after the old. And all of this is also labor, is also work that we perform in this kind of environment. Why is that not important? And it's an important question as well. So it's not always good to recognize something happening out there. It's also good to recognize something that happens in the everyday. Remember what we said? International relations is everyday life, right? And so imagine there's a war going on, but somebody is cooking, cleaning. Right now, even some of my friends in Israel, when the hostage crisis occurred, many of them were doing the laundry for the soldiers who were fighting. And they were, constantly doing laundry or cleaning or providing food. That is international relations. There's a war going on, and they're doing something so meaningful. I mean, people, my parents' generation and before that, they remember the wars with Pakistan, with, 71, 65. They remember how society was mobilized. They all had to contribute, towards the war efforts. They would knit, they would sing, they would, send things to the soldiers. There used to be a program to entertain the soldiers. So every society becomes part of that, right? So we don't escape it. Thankfully, we don't want to see any of that situation in the future. But our parents' generation, older than them, older than your parents, they've seen this. They've seen how it is important to become part of it. So how then do we work for peace? Yesterday, I told you one thing, which is the idea of difference, to respect difference, right? So I've just finished a book which is on Father Kamil Bulk or Bulke, whichever name you prefer. We call him Bulke. And he was a very important figure from Jharkhand, which is my home state, as you know. And he was from Ranchi, and he was a Padma Bhushan. He was a Belgian. Belgium is in which continent? Belgium is in which continent? Europe. And what is the capital of Belgium? Huh? Yes, I can hear it somewhere. Brussels, thank you. Yes, Brussels is the capital. Your name? Vanya. Okay, thank you. Brussels is the capital. Now, Belgium is largely a Catholic country, so a number of missionaries came to India who were involved in the Christian missions and the churches and the work that they did. Father Bulke came in the 1930s to India. And I have just written a story about his life, a biography, which will be published in about 2-3 months' time. I'll send a copy to the school and maybe you can all flip through it. Very interesting guy, because at some point he received this calling in life that I want to become a priest. He was a regular individual, right, growing up in a part of Belgium which spoke French, and Flemish actually was his language. And he came to India thinking that this is where I want to do missionary work. And he was an educationist. He came to India and he fell in love with Hindi as the language. Unki khud ki bhasha thi Flemish, it was not French. Although he was living in the French part of Belgium those days, he was very attached to his own language, which was Flemish. So he was always opposed to French domination. Europe has had many, many language wars as well. Right now we think that Europe is French and German and Swedish and Danish, but they had many, many, language issues as well, like us. We are a multilingual country, and thank God for that. अगर कोई एक भाषा दूसरे पे हावी हो जाए, तो conflict तो होता ही है, right? So we are good because we have so many languages that we respect and we should try to learn. I did try to tell you that. Father Bulke came to India and learnt Hindi. And Hindi के साथ उन्होंने अवधी सीखी. अवधी भी एक भाषा है जो हम जानते हैं, and especially in the Ramcharitmanas, and several other texts have been written in Avdhi. And through Hindi, he discovered Avdhi, and he also learnt Braj Bhasha, right? And he also became a scholar of Sanskrit. क्योंकि आप हिंदी सीख रहे हैं, इंडिया में तो है, without Sanskrit you can't do anything. He learned all of these languages. The first thesis that was submitted in Hindi in independent India in 1947-49 was Father Bulke's thesis, right? Which was in Hindi at Allahabad University. Now imagine a padre, a missionary, a priest who comes from Belgium, a young man, a white European, learns a totally new language, submits a thesis which is on Ram Katha, which is the different versions of the Ramayana story. So he collected the stories and he analyzed it in Hindi and he submitted a thesis. And then he became a scholar. He goes to St. Xavier's College, Ranchi, and he sets up the Department of Hindi and Sanskrit. And wahan pe he did a lot of work interpreting Tulsidasa's literature, not just the Ramcharitmanas, but also Vinay Patrika and, the Baki jo Tulsi ki granth hai, unko pada. And he used to say that I admire Tulsi. The way Tulsi served Ram, I want to serve Christ in the same way. He was deeply inspired by that culture. But why I think he's an important figure for us to understand peace, because he worked towards understanding Indian culture, right? We are taught these days that difference is so problematic, right? यहाँ पे ये हो रहा है, वहाँ पे वो हो रहा है, यहाँ पे violence हो रहा है, communalism, conversions, so on. We learn so many of these things, but there are some interesting stories of people who have done great service to humanity by trying to understand a different society. तो उन्होंने और क्या किया? He became a lexicographer. Have you heard the term lexicography? He became somebody who compiled dictionaries. So one of the first dictionaries in India from Hindi to Sanskrit, English to Hindi, English words जिनके Hindi meaning होने चाहिए, Father Bulke ने compile किया है. It's called the Bulke Dictionary. It's used in all the government offices today. Has anybody heard of it? The big thick dictionary that we used to read when we were kids, it'll still be there. Go to some sarkari office and see. It's still there. It's very much there. उसमें लिखा रहता है Kamil Bulke Dictionary. And that is what got me curious. Ki, who is this person? A Belgian who compiles a dictionary? How remarkable. Think about that, right? Not easy for us to learn words in a new language. He gave us a dictionary. So anyways, he worked so much to build communities together, to bring people together, to have that intercultural dialogue between Christians, between Hindus. And he made the effort to actually know about Hinduism. He was not dismissive of it and said that, oh, इनकी तो पूजा करने की जो तरीके हैं वो अलग हैं, हम तो Christ को मानते हैं. He said, हम मान सकते हैं बिल्कुल. He was a very, very staunch, believing Christian. But उनकी सबसे अच्छी बात थी that you can be a Christian, but you can also try to learn another faith, right? You can learn about Hinduism and you can also learn about Christianity. So he worked a lot, and especially in tribal areas of Jharkhand, he did a lot of humanitarian work, and he used to get really upset with people who would not speak either of the languages in very good, any language that he said, apni bhasha sikho. He was very invested. Remember, India had just gotten out of colonialism. So he used to get very upset that, क्यों English में बात कर रहे हैं लोग? That was something that shocked him. Why in India everybody speaks in English? Why not in their own languages? Now you don't have to go that path because English is very, very important. And I said to you yesterday, learn English, learn it well, speak correct English, but also learn your mother tongue, and in addition to that, learn one other language. Hindi is good because we live in this part of the country where Hindi is spoken, but written Hindi bhi aani chahiye. और आपकी खुद की भाषा जो भी हो, गुजराती हो, बंगाली हो, मैथिली हो, तमिल हो, तेलुगु हो, वो भी आनी चाहिए, right? It is important, as many languages as you can pick up. It is a blessing, and this is an age where you can pick up the language. So he worked towards understanding of that peace and equality among people. And I also wanted to share with you, of course, we know what Gandhi did. Gandhi was also a believing Hindu, but he also believed that Hinduism was a religion which invited other people to participate in a compassionate understanding of humanity. Remember, non-violence तो उन्होंने दिया ही, पर वो ये भी कहते थे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जो, वो आपको भजन वो पता है. Who is the true follower of God? Somebody who lives an ethical life, right? Loosely translated. So, and where did his sense of, he used to read the Bhagavad Gita, and that strength of religion made him strong and made him believe that this is what his religion taught, which is to have compassion. On the right side, you see the picture with Gandhi. There is a gentleman sitting there. If anybody can identify that person, I promise I will send you an award if I can't get it to you today. So tell me who it is. Huh? Nay? Okay. Anyone. I want, if anyone can recognize the gentleman who is sitting next to Gandhi in that picture, I promise you an award. आपको तो नहीं बोलना था, बच्चों से पूछ रही थी. हाँ, पर अभी शायद लोगों ने सुना नहीं यहाँ पे, maybe everybody didn't hear, but हाँ, सही है जवाब. हाँ, बोलो. हाँ, आपने तो सुन लिया उनको. हाँ, चलो कोई नहीं. हाँ, बोलो. हाँ, चलो सबको प्राइज मिलना चाहिए फिर तो. Wonderful. Yes, it is Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. And Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan is somebody we should all learn about and learn from his life. He was a Pashtun leader from Northwest Frontier Province, जो कि अब पाकिस्तान में है, right? और वो एकदम border area के है, पाकिस्तान और अफगानिस्तान के बीच में है. It's called the Northwest Frontier Province, and he was a Pashtun, and he was a very staunch, like Gandhi, he was a staunch Muslim, and he believed that his religion was about compassion and about peace, and he created a group of young people called Khudai Khidmatkar, कि खुदा की बंदगी करने वाले लोग, जो servants of God, loosely translated, and he called them Khudai Khidmatkar. The idea is that as servants of God, you serve humanity. And how did he do that? One of his biggest contribution was, Gandhi ji ने क्या किया? Gandhi ji ने कहा caste discrimination is bad, and he also said bring women out of the situation that they're in. So caste and women पे उन्होंने बहुत काम किया, right? You remember Gandhi, apart from non-violence, also did a lot for social reforms. Ghaffar Khan did that, and he said any society is recognized in terms of its civilizational values by the status of its women and their education. And so he created a number of schools for girls in an area where it was unheard of. It was very, very difficult for girls in Pashtun society to get education, and Ghaffar Khan created a number of schools. And एक उनका बहुत अच्छा model था peaceful resolution of conflict. So because he came from a tribal community, Pashtuns की जो tribes थी, so they would have a lot of clashes, right? So he would bring people together and jirga उसको कहते हैं, जहाँ वो लोग बैठ के अपने conflicts को resolve करते थे, right? कितना अच्छा उन्होंने तरीका निकला, जिंदगी भर उस पे काम किया. He opposed the partition till the very end. He died much later, and he opposed it, and he was very upset when partition occurred on the basis of religion. He did not want to be part of Pakistan. He wanted to be very much remain with, one big, country called India. And Pakistan, maybe after that, his area went to Pakistan, and he was so unhappy. Even within Pakistan, the state did not treat him properly because he was always considered someone who was a traitor, who was not, who did not believe like Jinnah did in the cause of Pakistan. So he had numerous problems with the state of India and Pakistan both. India, because India, he felt, betrayed the cause and allowed partition to happen, and Pakistan because he believed that we didn't need a partition based on religion. But he was a very, very remarkable individual whose contribution is enormous. And what do? We forget these people. आज जब हम बोलते हैं कि Pashtun society में क्या जानते हो, तो most of my students will tell me, oh, don't the Taliban come from there? Yes, Taliban today, but Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, those, years ago, decades ago, who gave us a different model of thinking, right? And he worked, he was very close to Gandhi, he believed in non-violence, and where did that come from? That came from his religious understanding of his religion, of his understanding of his religion. So you can use religion constructively. Father Bulke used his Christianity to understand Hinduism and community. Ghaffar Khan used his religion to, become the leader of Muslims and also talk about Hindu-Muslim unity. Gandhi ji ne yahi kiya, right? So there have been role models, right? Not just these men. I also have some examples for you from women who were not just women from India, but who were born abroad, who were foreign women who came to India on different kinds of spiritual missions, but who became anti-colonial activists, who opposed British rule, and who became advocates of humanity, of intercultural unity, and of peace, and worked for India's independence against the British. Now, isn't that interesting? They're all foreign European women. On the right, can anybody tell me who that is? Yes. Excellent. Rishikesh, right? Annie Besant, you've answered that, and I do see that a number of you know. Yes? Nahi beta, that's not Mother Teresa, that is somebody else. You're close, but do you know the second one? Nahi. Okay, doesn't matter, we'll come to that. But let's go one by one. Annie Besant came to India and founded the Theosophical Society. Exactly, and you know the history of how they work towards creating better religious understanding. In the middle is Margaret Noble. She was called popularly Sister Nivedita. उनका नाम कभी सुना होगा आप लोगों ने. She was a follower of Vivekananda, right, exactly. And she worked a lot for India's independence, and she also worked within the school system. She was teaching in a school, and she read all of Vivekananda, unki shishya bani, aur unhone kitna kaam kiya towards the cause for India's independence. Also worked with different leaders of that time, and Vivekananda really trusted her with the work that he wanted to achieve in India. And she was an Irish woman, by the way, from Ireland. And then on the left, so that's England, Ireland, and here is the mother. She's popularly known as the mother of the ashram in Pondicherry. Pondicherry में Auroville है ना? Aurobindo ashram जिसको हम कहते हैं. किसी ने सुना है उसके बारे में? Aurobindo ashram कहते हैं. Have you been there? Yeah, isn't it? You've seen the mother, of course, but she was a remarkable woman. She was French, and her real name was Mira Alfassa, And she came to India and she became part of India. She became a follower or a kind of devotee, and later on she began to be called the mother of, with Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo, he was a spiritual leader, first a revolutionary and freedom fighter, and then he became a spiritual leader. She worked with him. She created this ashram where the idea was to foster global unity and to create a city. Auroville, the idea of Auroville was a city where all of humanity could feel the oneness of humanity, that we would not be separated by caste, creed, religion, nationalism, that all of us could come together. And she was very, very politically active when India was in conflict with France over the control over Pondicherry, because Pondicherry, or Puducherry now, was a French colony, if you remember, and there was a long, long battle for independence, and she was working, negotiating on behalf of the Indian government and fighting, or rather making a case for Pondicherry's independence and assimilation into India from the French. So what a remarkable story that is. I just want to tell you that race is no barrier, right? These are all white European women, but who made India their homes. There are so many stories of transgressions. That's another of my favorite words, good transgressions. That transgressions can be productive when you cross boundaries, when you think outside what your capacity is or what you are told. You're often told, right? Ye socho. Ye hai tumhara daira, right? These are the boundaries within which you think. You have to break that barrier in your head. पहले हेड में वो बाउंड्री हटानी होती है, फिर और कुछ हटता है, right? So when you break that mental barrier, you achieve so much more that these women have, these men have, and they've given us so many different and wonderful models to work with. So I just, and there are many other examples as well that you can think of in your real life, who your role models are. Ajkal problem ye hai that we don't have enough role models, but we have had them. Read their stories and learn something. And I think for you, the school and how this school operates and everything about it, to me, that itself is a role model. You can have so many teachers here, your friends, your parents, they're all role models here, right? So think about what you can learn from these people, just as they in the past have given us so much to think about. We often don't think about their lives. It's not easy to be a foreigner, come to another country, learn other cultures, and then to write and engage and to become an activist in that culture. Indians have also done that abroad, but I'm just giving you these examples. So I want to stop here in terms of like a formal presentation, but let's have some discussions. I did have some exercise, but I've asked you enough questions. How much time do we have? Kitna time? 10 to 12 minutes. So that's enough then. Let's have a good session of Q&A. So ask me or share your thoughts with me about everything that you've learned. You may have some other questions, not just related to the lecture, anything else that you want to ask me. These are the last few minutes that we can spend together. After that, I'll be headed home. And hopefully, I just hope that we will stay in touch or there'll be another encounter at some point. But ask me anything that you want to, if I can answer that.
Can brain drain be recognized as IR?
Can brain drain be recognized as IR? Of course. Why does brain drain occur? Because there are not enough opportunities in one particular part of the world, right? For example, India. So there's no opportunities here. People have degrees. People have, most of the IITians, for example, IIT ke engineers, bahar kyun jana padta hai unko videsh, right? They go to America, England, they find jobs there. Why is it that there are not enough jobs here, right, of the kinds they want to do? So of course it's IR, because then they become migrants. They go to another country, then they earn there. Some of that remittance comes back to the country because they support families. So of course it's an IR problem. It's linked to everything, quality of education, the mobility, what it does to society. Brain drain occurs in many different forms. Think about it. When I went to Kerala, for example, in Trivandrum, or at least in Kochi, I saw huge houses. So many people in Kerala have left for the Middle East. They're working there. That there are these, and they've all been sending remittances, right? So money comes to their parents. They are earning abroad or to other members of their family. So they're big houses that have been built, but there are no humans in those houses. I mean, I was just amazed to see the number of huge palatial houses that are actually abandoned because there's some old elderly couple living there whose children are living in the Middle East and they can't see their children, but they have a big house, which is hard to maintain as well. So of course, not just brain drain, any kind of migrant inflow and outflow, which is related to economic reasons, is an IR issue, definitely. Anyone else?
As we know that USA and Russia both are very famous for their military deals and world defense power. So, and both also fights a lot in for deals. So, ma'am, in your perspective, which is more beneficial, the Indo-US deals or Indo-Russia deals?
Which is better? Okay, now that's a core IR question, so I better put on my IR teacher's hat. Russia has always been an unreliable partner in a lot of ways in the last few years because of the shift in the governance pattern. First, it was a communist country, then you had different series of leaders where there was Boris Yeltsin, then Putin, who has had his own style, Gorbachev. So, you know, it's gone through these phases. Putin is considered an unpredictable leader. So that's why there's a little bit of Russia, and also what they did with Ukraine. They've become a kind of a pariah in the international system, right? As in they are looked at with suspicion because we don't know what's going on, right? US, on the other hand, has been inconsistent in its own way, but more consistent in terms of its internal structures. It's a democracy like India. It has its elections. You know the kind, you'll get either the Democrat or the Republican. So there's more predictability with the US. Now keep in mind that for a good number of years, India had good relations with USSR, right? Always had good relations during the Cold War, and Pakistan was closer to the US, right? But, and remember when India tested nukes in 1998, they were banned actually by US. US took a really strong position against both India and Pakistan testing nukes. They didn't like it that other countries become nuclear power, right? So in the current circumstances, I would say that first of all, the US is a declining power. It's not as if India gets great deals from the US in that sense. But I would argue that the unpredictability of Russia right now doesn't make it a very reliable partner. So I think that there is more, strategic thinking involved in kind of thinking with the US and thinking about how to do things. And we have, in the last few years, worked very hard to build that relationship with the US, which was not very good. But now it got better and better. We'll see what happens in the future. But even under Trump, we didn't have such a bad relationship with the US. Yeah. Yes.
Ma'am, why world organizations are not taking actions toward the dictatorship of Kim Jong?
North Korea.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. That's a very tough one. I wish I could, oh God, it's like a googly, you know, I can't, I mean, I'm clean bowled here. Why don't they do anything? Why don't they do anything? Yes, because they're stupid. No. No, they don't care. No. As I told you, there are international laws. The United Nations has laws to deal with authoritarian regimes. But at the end of the day, do remember that the power of the UN comes from individual nation states, right? Now, North Korea, and I remember we said that the P5, the big 5 countries in the Security Council, which are actually authorized to take military action or to do something strong, is the Security Council, right? Security Council is P5, the big 5 countries. China is one of them. And China has good relations with North Korea because it's, you know, this communist country. So and every time the other states want to do anything, what will China do? Have its veto power, right? It will veto out any action that they want to take there, right? So they don't go there. Similarly, if the US wanted to, if China wanted to do something somewhere, you know, the US would veto. So I think the reason why we have not been able to achieve some of these goals of addressing authoritarianism or addressing even wars is because the UN is literally an old system which needs reforms that it has not been successful in, right? And the other important thing is also stakes, right? What is at stake here? And you're right that, you know, why don't they do anything? Part of it is also that some parts of the world in international relations doesn't really matter. And I'll tell you why. Every day we hear of violence in Afghanistan, Pakistan, somewhere there's a bomb going off, something happens, right? Africa, there's a number of deaths in Africa that we don't even hear of. Lekin agar Europe mein, you see a terror attack somewhere, it makes like big news. 5 people died, 2 people died, it becomes really big news. And hundreds of people, meanwhile, can die in another part of the world, and we don't seem to care. And this is a question we need to ask within international relations, why? I mean, one of the shocking things for me was when I landed in Africa for the first time. My first trip was to Kigali. And one report that I saw on African local news, जैसे हमारे यहाँ news है ना channels, वहाँ भी हैं, तो हमारा अफ्रीका का न्यूज़ कहाँ से आता है? अल जज़ीरा से आता है या फिर BBC से आता है, CNN से आता है. Even in India, Indian news media is not reporting about Africa. Nothing. Do you read anything? No. There I land up in Africa, and one of the news was that within the last, and this is 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the news was that within the last, I think they said 1 month or something, in Burundi, which is a small country, which is a neighbor of DRC, Congo and Rwanda, उसके साथ में एक छोटी सी country है Burundi. वहाँ पे 3,000 children had died within 1 month of malaria. And I remember seeing that news and I was like, why? I mean, malaria is not such a, dangerous disease anymore in many parts of the world, but there were children dying because medicines didn't reach them, nothing reached them. Now compare the 3,000 deaths there to a terror attack in Europe where 1 person has died, right? What gets news coverage? You've had this session on media, you watch media, you know what it is, right? So, and it's not the fault of the media people, it's just that the world is so unequal and we are still guided by those values. You and I need to challenge that. You and I need to ask that question. ये जो सवाल आपने मुझे किया है, I hope one day you are there sitting in policy circles and you ask that question to those policy makers who are not concerned about these things. So North Koreans who are suffering, we don't care. Yemen mein famine ho raha hai, we don't care, right? We don't care. That is the right answer, actually. Should we care? Yes, and that's what we learned. But that's a great question. I really don't have a better answer. The question is better than the answer. You know what they said about, was it about Lal Bahadur Shastri that somebody had written on his paper that the examinee is better than the examiner or something like that? So it's like that here. At the back, yes, thank you.
Ma'am, I would like to take on the issue of Africa only.
Huh.
So we are getting to know about how in Colombo and everything, the big organizations that are
Yes.
mainly from US and China, they usually fund these countries. They take on child labors from these countries. And when there is questions about this child labors, the long hours of work, the workload and everything, this organization just straight out deny. They don't take the accountability. They say that we just employed these contractors and they were doing these illegal things. So there is no repercussion for those actions, basically. And this big organization usually deny that accountability, and that's how Africa is bleeding, and all these problems are occurring. And I would like to know that in the individual level, because we get to know about all these things, and if we care about all these things, what are the actions that we can take in the individual level, as teachers, as students? Is there anything that we can do? Because if we are caring about those actions and we are not doing anything about it, then our emotions, the regulation of our emotions, obviously we get stressed and might get upset about it, but if there's no action that we can do, it does not result into anything. So is there any actions as individuals that we could take? Because small drops make an ocean, as
No,
they say.
absolutely,
So-
absolutely. I completely share that, and I'm so glad that you pointed out that there's so much that goes on. The continuous colonization of Africa in a different way now. You know, it's not just that old colonies, they've all become decolonized, independent countries, but there are different forms of economic colonialism, for example. Not just China, not just the European Union, or not just the US, but India is also part of that share of the loot right now. You know, we have a number of Indian companies that are involved in Africa. I see it firsthand. They go there and they all want a share of the pie, and they're all investing in businesses there. They're taking over African lands and, African agriculture, for example. There's a lot happening there where big powers like India and China are competing for African resources, right? So you're absolutely right, it's happening. I've seen it. In the 1970s, there was a dictator in Uganda called Idi Amin. And you've probably heard all sorts of, horrible stories about him. There was an English film, which I can't remember. Was it the King? No, the last, I'm bad with names, but they recently made a film on Idi Amin. And one of the things that Idi Amin did when he took power in Uganda is drove away all the Indians from there. They were all the businesses there, and he drove them away because he said that, Indians are no good. And people kind of read it as horrific discrimination of Indians, but actually there was a story because all the Indians were the, businesses, running businesses, and, a lot of the black people, Ugandans, felt discriminated. So they're the very complex stories. Har story ka na white और black के बीच में बहुत good और bad के बीच में एक दुनिया होती है, right? उसको पकड़ने की ज़रूरत है, नहीं तो हमको लगेगा हम बस good में बैठे हैं या bad में बैठे हैं. But everything is complex. That's what IR teaches you, right? Or any social science discipline. Science also. Science, maybe there are no good or, perfect answers. It's very messy. You have to keep updating your knowledge. So you're absolutely right. We get emotionally affected. I mean, since I started going to Africa, I also saw the complicity of India or, my own, sense of self. I would feel very bad. Not just that, when African friends would travel to India, how we would treat them. We don't treat people in our own country who have a darker skin. Forget about, somebody who's coming from Africa who's really, really dark, right? So, those kinds of discrimination really affected me. I'm like, when do we start treating people as equals? You're right that it affects us, but I think creating a discourse about it is important. पहले तो हम बात ही नहीं करते. I mean, as I said, how many of us even recognize which countries are there in Uganda? In Uganda, East Africa में कौन है? Kenya है, Rwanda है, Burundi है. We don't even know these countries. I mean, if I ask people generally, South Africa is at the most, you would be able to say something about South Africa because there was Nelson Mandela and there was this big fight against apartheid, right? But beyond South Africa, we know very little about Africa and our connections with Africa, our relationship with Africa. We don't know that. So do we care? I mean, why do we just care about the white world, about Europeans and wanting to know everything about our relationship with them? So the things that we can do are small scale in terms of first generating knowledge in at least having, for example, doing small projects on, what is our relationship to Kenya, how many people were there, how did Indians go there? The more knowledge that we create, we are in the business of knowledge, right? Creating knowledge, co-creating knowledge. Classroom में क्या होता है? आप और मैं मिलके knowledge बना रहे हैं. I'm not here imparting knowledge to you. I'm learning from you. So this has become a space in the last 3 days where knowledge is being created, right? And so that knowledge can transform thinking. So I really believe that at that small level, if we can do little projects, there are also other ways in which we can raise awareness, about things that are happening in the world that we think matter to us. It doesn't mean that it straight away goes to the Prime Minister or South Bloc and, policies are made based on our inputs. But we have a right to, spread knowledge and to create that knowledge together. पहले तो हमें जानकारी ही नहीं है. Are we creating enough structures in place where we know about these things, so many things that you said, I bet you talk to informed people in your circle, they would not know that this is happening in Africa. And India is also very much involved in the land grab, because it's not sufficient, the resources that we have in this country, so we have to go and take resources from somewhere else. Many of the African states are in a mess because of the wars that are going on, right? And they have been exploited for so long. We also talk about Africa as if ये पूरा continent ही एक है, Africa है. उसमें अनेक countries हैं, सबके अपने अपनी कहानियाँ. It's like South Asia बोलो तो सिर्फ India नहीं होता ना, right? जब हम साउथ एशिया बोलते हैं तो उसमें पाकिस्तान भी है, अफगानिस्तान है, नेपाल है, भूटान है, right? So many countries. So Africa is not just one Africa. It's a continent of so many multiple experiences, multiple people. हम बोलते नहीं all black people look alike. No, there are differences in how they approach life, how they have lived, the histories of these countries. So I think that genuine investment in knowledge will be really excellent to start with, but there are the other small ways as well. Any other questions, comments? हाँ, बोलो. हाँ. Oh God, now I'm in a difficult spot. How do I even answer that? You're right, why don't they reform? The question of reform karenge kaun, right? It is the big countries that are also major investors in the UN. UN के जितनी agencies है, उनका पैसा कहाँ से आता है? सोचो. All the powerful economies, the G20 or the G7 or G5, जिनको जो group of powerful economies हैं, आखिर ये पैसा उन्हीं का आता है. So they are the ones in position. If the US, for example, think about the US as a powerful, player. If the US withdraws its hand from the World Bank and from the IMF, the UN will not have the resources that it needs. So these countries, and you could argue, is it there, should they be involved? Of course they should be involved because they have also been involved in exploitative relationship with the rest of the world. So they have taken the money. Should England give aid to, former colonies? Hell it should, because it looted so much money. All colonial powers in Europe, Belgium ho, Dutch country ho, Netherlands ho, Britain ho, Portugal ho, all these countries, Spain, I mean, these are major, they were major colonizing power, right? So they need to give money. So they give the money, and through the money they also keep the control that they have. And it's very difficult because there is no kind of formal ways in which they can think about reforms, but there's been a lot of development on that, where countries like India and South Africa, we now have our grouping called the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, different Brazil, Russia, South Africa, India. We have our own grouping called the BRICS countries. So they're doing different ways in which they can become influential power brokers. But the UN itself is bounded by so many factors, including finances, that it's very hard for them to kind of break the old model. Should they do it? Oh, definitely they should. When do we live to see that day when, I do believe that the Security Council should have, not every country can be part of it, like the General Assembly. The Security Council should have a group of countries that are responsible. But why is it only China and Russia and America and Britain and France? I mean, they don't depict the world reality. There's no African country there. There's no India. There's nobody from Latin America. So it doesn't make sense, right? So I don't know when that will happen. The process has been there. There's been a lot of talk about the reforms. And as I told you, finances play a very big role in this. Yeah. There was one other hand somewhere. Yeah, at the back, yes.
Ma'am, can peace in the world can be harmful for other superpowers?
Can peace in the world be harmful to?
Other superpowers.
Other superpowers, like which superpowers? Tell me, who are you thinking of?
USA.
Yeah, so my goodness, what a brilliant question. So if there is peace generally in the world, how will, basically will it, first of all, America is no longer the superpower that we imagine. It's a weakened power right now, right? Yes, it is better than most countries in terms of military and economic power, but it's no longer the world's policeman or superpower, right? In that sense. Now is Russia? Russia is not in that situation to command so much power. I would say that the world is more gravitating towards multipolar, right? Because India, China are also very powerful in their own way. Russia is powerful. America is still powerful. European Union is quite powerful. So there are different different sides of power, right? Now you are right, because this was the model in the past where, you know, these superpowers, especially during the Cold War, USSR and the US, they used to deliberately create conflicts in parts of the world so that the arms race could continue, right? And they could, they could sell their weapons. They were manufacturing a lot of weapons. In fact, this is one of the arguments made today, is also that there is so much manufacturing of weapons. Why do we manufacture weapons to kill? And then these weapons are dumped on these countries. They are sold to these countries. And then there has to be a war because you are using it, right? So it is a never-ending process. It's like the gun attacks in the US. You know, every now and then somebody picks up the gun, walks into a classroom and kills people, because America has horrendous gun laws. Anybody can own firearms in that country. It's not easy in this country, and thank God for that. Australia also, kind of made it difficult because there were some killings in Australia. बहुत मुश्किल है इंडिया में भी इस तरह से कि कहीं से वेपन ले लो और घूम जाओ क्लासरूम में. And अभी प्राग में हुआ है, just last 2-3 days ago at Charles University, philosophy department, 15 people have been shot dead. And to be honest with you, when I was teaching in Australia, even when I go to America to teach, sometimes I'm actually edgy because I know this happens. People just walk in with a gun and you are shot. So हम कहते हैं ना कि we are so much, America, everything is good, everyone is safe there. It's actually very, very unsafe, very unsafe, It's much safer. I always feel safer from everywhere I travel in the world. I feel the safest in my home country. I can tell you that. It's not easy living in Europe because there is sporadic violence can occur anywhere. It's not easy being in any part of the world, not in Africa, not in Australia, where I have also had racial attacks. मेरे ऊपर तो ऐसे मतलब मार भी खाया है, race, somebody got really upset and they just hit me, and then I was like, oh my God, this can happen. So I'm just telling you, you feel safety is a very strange concept in terms of, how. So I would say that, yes, this happens, that कभी कभी होता है कि जब लोग शांति से जी रहे होते हैं ना, किसी एक को पसंद नहीं आता है. ये हमारे रियल लाइफ में भी होता है, राइट? कोई है जो बहुत देखता रहता है कि my interests are not served because these people are not fighting. So it always happens. It's like your everyday life is what is mirrored in the international. It's the microcosm. हम जैसे conflict आसपास होती है हमारे classrooms में, घरों में, it's the same thing that's reflected abroad, or in that international space that we imagine, right? So you're right, it would not, it could be detrimental to those who want to seek power in that sense. But power can be understood differently. You can have that status and power, but you can think of it as doing something good with other countries instead of seeing it as, something that necessarily kills. I mean, if you think about how many people America has killed over the years and destroyed in the name of fighting terrorism or bringing democracy or bringing rights to women, it has a horrendous human rights record, America was opposed to India acquiring nuclear weapons, right? Sanctions ho gaye India ke khilaf, Pakistan ke khilaf. The only country to have used nukes in the world, atom bomb, and to have bombed people, civilian cities is America. Which two cities did they bomb? Exactly. And there's a new film that has come, Oppenheimer. I'm not sure that it's for children, but for those who are able to watch, the adults, please watch it. It's a very fine film. And aap log bhi, jaise I'm sure that there would be ways in which you can access it. It's a good film, Oppenheimer, because Robert Oppenheimer was the guy who kind of is considered the guy who made the nuclear. But he also was later castigated by Americans because he was called a communist spy. So for a number of years, there was a case against him. It's a very interesting story. So yes, there's always groups of countries whose power will prevent them from accepting that world peace is possible. But the important thing is to think about world peace where everybody has a stake in it, right? And to tell them, to convey to the superpowers that whoever superpower that be, that their actions are unacceptable, immoral, and there has to be protest against that. Or hota hi hai, America or Russia, unilaterally, even if they do things, we have the moral power. People still protest, right? We can't lose sight of that. More questions? Couple more questions and we'll close this. I think there was a question in the middle here. Okay, you go at the back, yes.
Ma'am, are we talking about international relations or e-commerce relations? Because I believe in Marx, not completely agree with his philosophy, but with his vision that money is the power. And those people who have the money make the policies or the politicians. So are we talking about national interest or the trade interests? And another thing, there is peace and development. So as he said, you mentioned, so there can't be peace and development in equality. There somewhere there is a peace, there is a little bit development, and another way there is war. So if we find peace everywhere, the development will be mediocre. But now there is developed country, underdeveloped country. So basically some countries are more developed, some countries are underdeveloped. And another thing, if we are living in reality or we are living in illusion, delusion or discourses made by these e-commerce policies.
Great questions. I'll try and answer as much in the ways that I can. Well, you know, you're right that power or international relations is about e-commerce, as you call it. I will call it political economy, right? It's economic relations, political economy, because it's not just economics in the plain sense, but it's also about political power and politics combining with economy. So of course you're right that money matters everywhere in international relations. It is acquisition of more material wealth for a country that also determines its national interest, right? National interest is not about good values. It's not about civilizational values. It's also about maximizing power, maximizing your military capability, maximizing your economic power. So of course, in that sense, it is very much visible. But that kind of material power, what you call e-commerce or economic relations or money power, has its limits, right? It doesn't get you everything. And America is a good example. The fall of America in the last decade or more. And I would argue that started with the war in Iraq, which was a terrible, terrible decision. Even if you want to justify the war in Afghanistan 2001, the 2003 invasion of Iraq is considered to be the most disastrous decision taken by the American President Bush those days. And since then, American power has seen this decline. I mean, today, Mr. Biden has absolutely no power to even convey to his biggest ally in the Middle East, which is Netanyahu, to tell him to kind of think about ceasefire or stop. I mean, he says one thing today, another thing today. There was a time when America commanded that power and authority. And let me give you an example. When India went to war with Pakistan, Kargil, 1999, we were very close to having a nuclear conflict. This is well known that Washington had to intervene, and the Pakistani premier was summoned, and the prime minister, and he was told that this is not how it should be, that you have to de-escalate, and there was pressure building. So there was a time when people like Clinton, people like before him Reagan, and before him Senior Bush, all of them wielded some kind of power. America had some say in the international system. I would argue now, if something happens between China and India or India and Pakistan, and if Biden calls up our prime minister and says, what are you doing? You're not supposed to do it. You think anyone will care? I doubt that very much. I think we have our own policies in place, and good or bad, I'm not debating that here, but all I'm saying is that the American power to leverage and to speak on behalf of another world and to convey common sense to other countries, it does not exist. Nobody's going to listen to America anymore. It is under steady decline, right? So that's one thing. What was the second thing? Yeah, the development I would again say to you that it appears to be like that, but again, there are limits to what you understand as the developed world, right? Development हम किसको कहते हैं कि अच्छी सड़कें हैं, अच्छी शिक्षा व्यवस्था है, healthcare is fantastic in America, for example. America को आप मानोगे ना बहुत अच्छी country है. It took one COVID-19 to demolish that country, right? One COVID-19 to tell us that American healthcare is totally farcical in providing healthcare to the needy. I'm not saying that India did well. I'm not saying we had our own problems. In 21, so many people died of what happened during the second wave of COVID. We know that, right? I'm not even getting there. But later on, when we managed to vaccinate people, we managed to pick up the pieces, local level से लेके national level तक जिस तरह का प्रयास हुआ यहाँ पे, it was much, much better than what I saw in Europe, for example, or what I have seen in America. You need insurance of, of some kind, and that was Obamacare actually. Obama had tried to introduce that, but it's very difficult in America to go to hospitals and get any health care if you're a poor person. You don't earn money. I mean, it's, people who work, for example, in restaurants, वहाँ पे बहुत हम tip देते हैं अमेरिका में. क्यों देते हैं? क्योंकि उनको सैलरी तक नहीं मिलती है, तो आप जो पैसे टिप में देते हो उससे उनका घर चलता है. They are employed, but they are not paid. They are told यहाँ काम करो, टिप मिलेगा तो तुम्हें, that is what will run your family. That's how some of the policies in that country are. It's an example of extreme capitalism where the state doesn't care for you as some of the other structures do. I live in Sweden where the state cares. Healthcare is free. It is from taxation money. Education is free because again taxes are very high, but the state cares. वहाँ पे है कि you go to school, you go to college, the state pays. इलाज होता है वहाँ पे. I walk into the best hospital in my city and I get a spine surgery. In 2020 I had a spinal problem and they cut open my neck. It was a pretty scary surgery, but I walked in, they did the surgery in the midst of COVID. I walked out and I did not pay a kroner. वहाँ के currency जो है kroner है. I didn't pay 1 krona. That's because I also pay taxes to the government. So I'm just trying to tell you that there are limits to how we understand development, and which is the problem in our country right now. Look at the development narrative. We need roads, we need housing, houses, we need 10 properties everywhere. Look at the pace of development, this concrete jungles that we are creating. It's going to, look at the disasters, natural disasters, landslides ho raha hai, flooding ho raha hai, because we just don't care about the kind of development we want. It's going to be a disaster. Copying, imitating the West and its level of development is going to cost us. We need a model which is sustainable, and in that sense, I don't think that wo divide itna sharp hai. We have to redefine in our mind what is development, which is the developed world. On many things, we are far more developed, I feel, than anywhere in the West, And I'm not telling you from anecdotal instance. I've actually lived in these countries, and I have seen what the policy looks like. We are much better off here in many ways, but also there are problems that we have, because we want to, on the one hand, criticize them, but we also want to become like them, right? So that's a problem. There was a third point, but I can't remember that. Can you repeat? There was one other thing you said.
I said that, are we seeing the reality, or it's just a delusion, illusion, or discourses made by these e-commerce holders?
No, you're right. Discourses are definitely being shaped in different ways, whether it is through social media, through policies, through government utterances. India mein bhi to hota hai na, governments always are creating discourses. Bureaucrats are creating discourses. It is our job as students, as curious individuals, as citizens to question it, right? So of course there is a discourse that always exists. Uske beyond dekhne ki capacity hamari kya hai, right? That is interesting. So yes, there is a discourse in place, but it can be challenged. It's not the reality. It is a delusion in many ways, I would argue. It's not the actual reality. Jaise hum bolte hain na, social media is not real world out there. It's just a performative world, right? Any other questions? Yes.
Ma'am, can peace only be developed by friend relations between countries?
Can you repeat that?
Friend relations with countries, ma'am. Ma'am, because by taking the example of China, India and US,
yeah.
US and India have friend relations. Why? Because USA wants India to counter the influence of China in Asia. Ma'am, it is true.
Yes, that is true, and it's a good question, but I'll tell you one other thing that we have with China. The only time we have gone to China, is there something else you want to ask?
No.
No. So basically, China and India have coexisted. We are neighbors, right? The only time we went to war was 1962, right? You know that war, the history of that war. That war also has a complex history. उसका भी ये नहीं है कि China आया और ये हुआ इस तरह war हुआ. There's a context to that war. But we have been neighbors for so long, and the Chinese empire in the past and the Indian empires, whether it is under Mughals or usse pehle, we have lived in peace for many, many years. We share the border, we share cultural exchanges have always occurred. Buddhism traveled from India to China. Chinese Taoism has also influenced us. So we have always had these cultural exchanges. आपने पढ़ा होगा ना history में Huan Sang, Fa Yang, there was constant string of travelers who came. Recently, a friend of mine and a colleague has written a book on China-India civilizational relations, right? And unki nai kitab aa rahi hai, and it's a wonderful book which tells us about how these two countries have been together, how they see each other, and how there has always been peace. It's just this narrative that is created that they are competitors, they do this to each other. That is one part of the reality. The other is that there has always been this kind of exchanges, There are so many Chinese scholars who came to Shantiniketan, for example, and in Calcutta, and they learned about Indian culture. Similarly, Indians who travel to China, there is a Mandarin version of Ramcharitmanas. It's a very huge text. This entire text has been translated by a Chinese scholar into Chinese in the same Doha format, right? It's very difficult to write like that, but it has been translated because people were curious about these things. So cultural exchanges make us humane and make us human, both. And I would argue that it is possible to emphasize on these aspects rather than the fact that, we are just military powers and we are constantly, getting at each other. There are many other things to see about, India and China also, for example. We are always presented with this that, we are competitors, we hate each other. We don't have to. I mean, there's also this other history, And we have been the longest surviving big power neighbors. We are both nuclear powers. We have both had long histories. We have both been victims of colonialism. China ke upar British opium wars hue. Japan had colonized China, as you know. So China's had this history similar to ours as well. So there can be that shared empathy, right? Anyone else? Before we kind of close, is it nearly time? Yeah? Yeah, we'll end this here. Okay, so I'll take one last question, shall I? Just one final one? Yeah. And then we'll close it, yeah.
Ma'am, this is about the refugee crisis that is going on around the world. So first I would like to start with the Syria war. When that happened, the refugees, they were taken in by the European countries. But after that, it was seen that there was an increase in the international as well as the local terrorism in those areas. And there was a lot of resistance from the refugees as well. After that, because of which, during the Hamas war, they were reluctant to take the refugees. In India also, because of the same reason, we were reluctant to take the Rohingya when they came to us for shelter. So what other solution do we have for this refugee crisis? What is your take on
the answer to that is really simple. I think just, first of all, we need to disaggregate this notion of refugees, migrants, and terrorism. They don't necessarily go together. Statistics don't prove that, right? Many of the cases of terrorism are actually happen because somebody has lived in that country longer than the new refugees that have come in. So there is no data that validates that jin refugees ko liya woi terrorist ban gaye. I don't have any data to support that. There have been cases, one or two cases like that, but it's not like the norm, right? In most cases, refugees are extremely vulnerable people. There is one thing though. Different states have different capacities to take refugees. For example, I don't agree that India didn't take Rohingyas. We took a large number of Rohingya population. We took Afghanis as well. India is one country that has taken so many refugees over the years. Read Swami Vivekananda's Chicago address. He starts with that. India is a country that has given refuge to everyone persecuted in the world, in different parts of the world. So we have taken refugees. The difficulty is that each country has the capacity which is limited, in different ways. Europe has a completely different discourse. They took a number of refugees. The problem is that their entire social structure, their mental capacity, their idea of difference and social equality, it is being challenged constantly because they were not prepared to see so many people coming in of a different culture. So they are struggling. I see that in Sweden. Sweden took a large number of refugees from Syria and Somalia and Sudan, and now they're struggling with it because they have to provide social security to them, and it's not easy to deal with differences. So I would argue there are multiple problems, not just that they become terrorists or there is violence. Violence comes from deep-rooted anxieties in different societies. So it's not just refugees. I think we have to not equate refugees with terrorists. We have to think of them as people who are extremely vulnerable. It's not easy to be in that situation where you have to take a boat and you have to go to another country with your family. I told you the story of the Hazara student of mine who walked for thousands of kilometers to reach safety. So life is not easy for them, right? So I'll close here. I will hand over now to the chair. But thank you all for putting up with me for 2 days. And you've been such brilliant students, and I wish you so much success in anything that you do in your life, and that you always find a lot of love and a lot of happiness and peace around you, and that in the future you contribute to some of these things around you as well. So be safe, be happy, be healthy, and keep the process of learning going, right? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your enlightening presentation. Your expertise and the instances you delivered truly made a significant impact on our thought process and mindset related to international relations, peace, and development, and also given us a different outlook to the complexities of the global affairs we have in the interconnected world today. So thank you so much, ma'am. Your contribution was invaluable, and it was a great pleasure learning from you. Now, on behalf of the entire Palladian house, I'm very grateful to you for sparing your precious time from your busiest schedule for us. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, I would like to request our principal, ma'am, Mrs. Richa Gupta, to hand over a memento as a token of gratitude to our guest of honor. Now I would request our Prachi ma'am to hand over the gift as a token of memory. So with this, we end up our session here. So we will continue with the next session later. So thanks you.